All right, welcome everyone. And because I'm a complete sucker for punishment, and so are the 20 or so people who are sitting here, this is the bonus tute in the non-teaching week of T1 of 2018. This is nominally an introduction to law tute, but I'm hoping that through LVD and the learning firms it will find its way to a wider audience, because many of you, I suspect, will still find this to be quite useful based on the amount of whinging that I had last term in evidence and proof about people not wanting to come under word limits. We will, what I've done is I have asked a student whose name shall remain anonymous, but it might rhyme with Melanie Cook, to write me the worst essay that she possibly could on any topic that fell within introduction to law. And apparently, whilst she had great fun doing it, Mel said that it was quite difficult for her because she's now getting close to finishing the degree. It was quite difficult for her to get herself back into the situation of deliberately making all of these mistakes. But I've had a look at it and she's done an awesome job. But I've resisted the temptation to start getting ahead and actually editing it. So other than having read through it, I haven't really seen this paper. So my intention is to share the screen with you and to walk through the paper and just kind of give you a running commentary as I make changes to it. Now, the difficulty with doing that is that we haven't done a lot of share screen for those of you who are doing intro, and it requires nothing of you, but what it does mean is that I can't see you. And so if you have any questions, then rather than just unmuting and waiting for me to call on you, you may have to unmute and sing out. I'll also try and keep the best eye that I can on the chat box, so that if people have questions that they want to flick into the chat box, I'm happy to do that too. All right, so let me start trying to... Now, why is it not? For some reason, it doesn't seem to want me to... All right, Leonie, I can see you on the screen at the moment. Can you see a Word document in front of you at the moment? You can? Excellent. All right, so with any sort of luck at all... Nope, now it's gone. All right, Leonie, just reassure me that you can now see that, you can still see that Word document. Excellent. All right, so what we have here is a mock assignment that's been written by somebody who's not actually called Jenny. It's written to a word count of 1,000. We can see down the bottom of the screen that the word count at the moment is 911, not including the footnotes or the endnotes. And what we're going to do is go through it and slowly fix it. So the topic is on the hierarchy of Australian courts. And the first thing that I can see, well, does anybody want to signal in the chat box if you can see something? Actually, I can't even see the chat box. Let me pick someone at random. Bugger it, let me not. The first thing that I can see about this assignment that troubles me is that this first sentence is a monster. Okay, so this first sentence, if I highlight it, 68 words. Really, my suggestion to you all is that if you can't read a sentence without taking a breath, it's probably too long. I generally like to aim for sentences around the 25 to 30 mark, but sometimes you have to go well and truly over that. So let's look at it. Australian courts have an organisational hierarchy which gives structure to the different levels and bodies of courts, the courts ranking them in order of importance, so that the hierarchy provides that the different courts have different responsibilities, with the lower courts, like the state magistrates' courts, hearing minor or less important cases. Well, oh, bloody hell, this is a long sentence. So what's she trying to say? Well, the first thing that seems to be trying to be said here is that there's a hierarchy. And the second thing is that the hierarchy leads to different responsibilities. So if I said Australian courts are organised in hierarchies well, if I said Australian courts are structured in hierarchies, then we can get rid of the rest of that sentence, can't we? Because having different levels is pretty much inherent in a hierarchy. Then I can get rid of all of that and replace it with a simple they. So they have different responsibilities. Lower courts, like magistrates' courts, here. Now you can see here, this is a really common error that students make. Minor and less important pretty much mean the same thing. So we can cut out two words here straight away. So here, less significant cases, maybe, while higher courts, like Supreme Courts and the High Court. Now I'm going to see how we've got the word here, and then we've got the word adjudicate. This is kind of unnecessarily complex. We can just use here more serious cases. So you can see from 68 words or whatever it was, we've devolved that down into two sentences, and we've also saved ourselves 20-something words. So we're down under the 900 mark already for this paper. So we've now got Australian courts are structured in hierarchies. They have different responsibilities. Lower courts, like magistrates' courts, hear less significant cases, while higher courts, like Supreme Courts and the High Court, hear more serious cases. Now, I'm still not happy with that. I think we can get rid of this. And I don't like the word like here. So I'm going to use up some of those words that I've just saved by turning that to such as. So we've now got Australian courts are structured in hierarchies. Lower courts, such as magistrates' courts, hear less significant cases, while higher courts, such as Supreme Courts and the High Court, hear more serious cases. I'm also going to get rid of this apostrophe because whilst it is strictly speaking correct, if you look at the Magistrates' Courts Act, it doesn't have the apostrophe. So the official name of them doesn't include that apostrophe. So you can see already at the end of that first sentence, at the end of that first paragraph, we've saved a bunch of words and we've turned it into a much simpler and clearer expression. Those of you who might have been watching and might have done advanced statutory interpretation and legal drafting with me, which is basically a subject which is all about learning to write in excellent legal professional form, will already know how committed I am to plain English writing. Okay, the higher courts are also known as superior courts. Oh my God, we have a crime against apostrophes here. Hopefully most of you will have seen that in the learning firms, I've put everybody on notice that if you're not 100% confident of your use of apostrophes, there's a resource there for you to go and have a look at. what we've got here is an apostrophe that's been used to pluralize a word. Apostrophes never pluralize words. So if the only thing the S is doing on the end of the word is showing that there's more than one, in this case more than one court, then the apostrophe needs to go. And the same things happen here with appeal. So appeals and courts. So this is a student who really is struggling to use, and jurisdictions struggling to use apostrophes correctly. So we can get rid of those for a start. Next thing that jumps out at me about this sentence is that the number 2 has been indicated using the numeral. Now the standard is that you should really only use numerals when you get above about 20. Anything under 20, we really need to see the word, unless you're talking about, unless you're doing some sort of technical writing. Certainly in legal writing, I would expect that to be the word to rather than the numeral 2. We also have a long sentence here. Okay, so this is a 57-word sentence at the moment, and we can cut this back without losing any content. We can say the higher or superior courts can hear appeals against decisions made in lower courts. Now, this in Australia is doing nothing because the whole paper is about Australian courts, so there's no point telling us so in Australia. So we can get rid of that. We can say both federal and state jurisdictions. Well, actually, the both is doing nothing there as well. Federal and state jurisdictions had their own court hierarchies, and there is some sharing of jurisdiction which assists in the efficient use of resources. How does that sound? The higher or superior courts can hear appeals against decisions made in lower courts. Federal and state jurisdictions have their own court hierarchies, and there is some sharing of jurisdiction which assists in the efficient use of resources. So now we've cut that down to only 38 words, so we've taken about another 20 words out of it, haven't lost any meaning at all, shortened the sentences, made it heaps more readable. So if you just go and have a look over those first two paragraphs, you can see how much improvement we've made already. Next thing we've got here is we've got what we call nested headings. Now, nested headings are fine. In this case, I don't mind that there's nested headings, but you can see that both of these are in Arial 12 font bold, which means that when I read it, there's nothing there to signal to me which is the most important and which is the less important heading. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scoot down and turn all of these federal court hierarchy headings into italics and not bold. And there's a few of them, as you can see. Right. So you can see that that's now much easier to read because we've got a superior heading, and then we've got something to indicate that these are less important. Next thing is we best give the court its proper name. Now, when you're really trying to cut out words from an assignment, one of the things you can do is look for these connecting words. All that the words and therefore are doing in this situation is they're combining two separate sentences. So you just get rid of them. The High Court of Australia is the highest court in Australia. That's fine. It can hear appeals from all other Australian courts. I'm going to get rid of this connecting word as well. Its other major function is to interpret the Constitution and determine whether legislation is constitutional. And then this final bit, the High Court is veritably part of both federal and state court hierarchies, does absolutely nothing, does nothing. And the word veritably is particularly meaningless and just about offensive to my eyes, frankly. It's not helping. So we can get rid of all that. So now we've pulled that paragraph down to the High Court of Australia is the highest court in Australia. It can hear appeals from all other Australian courts. Its other major function is to interpret the Constitution and determine whether legislation is constitutional. Perfect. Next thing we've got is a punctuation issue, because at the end of the sentence there, when you've got a footnote indicator at the end of a sentence, it should always come after the full stop. Now, I'm a bit worried. Oh, I missed that one up there. There we go. I'm a bit worried about what sort of sources the student's using, because when I follow those footnotes down, what I've got is a Wikipedia page and Google Scholar, not cool. For any sort of legal writing, we're looking for properly authoritative cases. So what I would be looking for here, in fact, for both of these, would be some reference to the relevant Judiciary Act and the Constitution. So given that I'm just editing at the moment, I'm not going to go off and try and find the relevant references in OSLI. But if I was editing my own work here, that would be an indicator to me that these were things that I needed to go and do. So let's come back up here. The Appeals Division. Now, the Appeals Division is actually its proper name. So that's a proper noun that needs to have capitals. Oh, I beg your pardon. That's actually wrong. The student was right. The Appeals Division of the Federal Court is termed. I don't really like termed. I'm going to make that called, but termed is all right. The full court of the Federal Court. So that sentence is pretty much fine. Next one we've got is parties or individual persons that are disconsolate with the decisions made in the Federal Court may appeal to the full court rather than seeking special leave to appeal to the High Court, with the full court comprises of a panel of 3. That sentence is just a mess. And it's also wrong. Let's start by getting rid of these words that are unnecessary. Parties that are now, it really doesn't matter what people feel about decisions, does it? So let's say parties who consider the federal court has made an error may appeal to the full court. The student then seems to be indicating that special leave to appeal to the High Court is kind of an alternative, which it's not. So may appeal to the full court. After the matter is heard by the full court, they may seek special leave to appeal to the High Court. Now we've got this final bit of information, which is actually potentially useful, but it's just kind of stuck on there on the end, not doing anything. So what I'm going to do is stick that back up here. And again, we've got a really dodgy footnote there, so we'll get rid of that one as well. So what we've got now is, for some reason it's not showing me the word count, but it'll come up in a moment, and we've really kind of reduced. We're down to 835 words now. So we've reduced this paper by almost 10%, and we're not off the first page yet. When we get to the end of the first page, I'm going to stop screen share for a minute and take questions. Federal Court. Now, what we've got here, which reminds me to go upwards and look at this too. See how the headings finish in full stops? You don't want to finish anything in full stop with a full stop that's not a sentence. Okay, and the words Federal Court don't comprise a sentence. So we'll get rid of the full stops there, which also reminds me that if we have proper footnotes down the bottom here, then those of you who are following the AGLC like good students will know that you're supposed to finish footnotes with full stops as well. So here we have the Federal Court. The Federal Court is the approximate equivalent of a state Supreme Court with original jurisdiction to hear civil and criminal cases concerned with Commonwealth law. That's not too bad of a sentence, really. We can cut down one word. The Federal Court is approximately equivalent to a state Supreme Court. Comma in there to break the sentence up a bit, with original jurisdiction to hear Commonwealth civil and criminal cases. So we can get rid of a bunch of words there. So we're now down to 830 words, and we've got a footnote there. Let's have a look at it. Now, on this occasion, the student has cited the course materials. This is something that I haven't been penalising people for in the first assessment for intro to law, but you'd be heavily penalised if you keep doing it. You really just can't cite the course materials. The course materials are a place for you to do some learning, but then you have to go and do research on top of that rather than citing the course materials. Now, where do we find out about the Federal Court's original jurisdiction? Well, that's in the Commonwealth Justice Act. So I'll make a note for myself and go and find the Justice Act. The cases heard can involve, and then we've got a big long list with no commas. Really though, I'm just looking at this sentence. The cases heard can involve terrorism, immigration, customs, industrial relation, taxation, and corporate law. However, crimes such as attempted murder, murder, and assault are part of state criminal codes. Thus, the Federal Court does not hear these charges. Well, that's really just the same thing that we were saying up here, which is that they have separate jurisdictions. We've just said that the Federal Court hears Commonwealth civil and criminal cases, and these are Commonwealth matters, these ones to hear, and these are state ones. So really, I don't see that this sentence has any business being in the essay at all. All right, at this point, I'm going to stop the share and come back to the group. How are we travelling? Questions at this point?
When you say we can't use course materials, in the description for the first assessment, it did say like using information from the textbook, like your prescribed textbook. So is that not okay for future assessment?
The textbook's okay for this one,
okay.
But okay, first thing first is that you can't plagiarise. So if you are going to put in an assessment where you're basing your answers on the textbook, then you're going to have to own up to that by putting it in the footnotes.
Yeah.
However, people will tell you that the purpose of an assessment is to show your knowledge. That's not true. The purpose of you doing an assessment is to either force or invite the marker to give you marks.
Yeah.
Right? You're not really interested in showing me how much you know. You want to get a mark from me. You want to get as many marks as I can possibly give you, right? That's the honest truth of it, isn't it, Bridget?
Yeah.
Right. So imagine yourself as the marker for a moment. And imagine that, say, we're doing contracts and there's a case called Cutter and Powell, and the answer to the problem question involves referring to the case Cutter and Powell. Okay. Now imagine you've got two students in front of you. One of them is making a reference to the textbook. One of them is making a reference to the actual case, which suggests that they've gone out to the database and found the case and that they're reading the case in front of them. Yeah. Which student are you going to give more marks to?
Yeah, it shows a deeper search for that information.
Correct. And it shows that you've gone beyond the textbook and that you've started to use the skills that you will use in the profession by going into the databases and doing those sorts of searches. And so as you go deeper and deeper into the degree, you should be less and less inclined to be using the textbook. Now, at this point for intro, for this first assessment, it would be really silly of me to expect you to be demonstrating a bunch of research skills that you haven't been taught yet. Okay, it'd be quite unfair of me. And so students who've been referring to the textbook, I have been kind of indicating that that's not optimal, but it's not as though I've been marking them down. Whereas you can ask Leonie, who I had for evidence and proof last term, that if they tried to to reference the textbook with the late third year subject, then I would have been most unimpressed. So it's not, the textbook's not specifically forbidden, but you can do better than that. As soon as you've got those skills. And some people in the intro papers, I've got to say, have really made an effort to try and add research to their arguments, and I've tried to reward that, even though it's quite often materials that you wouldn't even think about citing once you're further on in the degree. But that's because you've got you haven't been introduced to those databases yet. So that will come. But the course notes you generally don't want to reference at all.
No. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the textbook's a little bit more legit, but the course notes. For instance, the course notes are not in a double-blind, peer-reviewed publication. So when I published the textbook, though, the textbook was reviewed by 4 or 5 different academics, and I don't know who they are. They could be colleagues of mine at CQ Uni. They could be from anywhere. And I was required to respond to any challenges or comments that they had. That's part of the process of quality control in academic publishing. That doesn't happen for course notes. So now, Katrina's asked, she said that in the textbook, she followed the footnotes and then researched and cited those references for information. Look, generally speaking, if you get a reference, let's say you get a reference to a case from the course notes or from the textbook, if you go out then and you actually find that case, so that if I came round to your place and said, well, show me how you found that case, you could do it, then you really only need to cite the case. Okay. Sometimes you do see references where someone says, you've got this thing that Dworkin said, and it's cited in another text, and that's fine. You do need to give both of those so that you're showing both the original author of the idea and where you found it. But generally speaking, the textbook and the course materials, they're given to you, or they're prescribed for you as a way to accomplish the learning. So going on and finding the case, you just need to cite the case. Does that clear that up for you, Katrina? I'm going to assume that's a yes. Yes, it is. Anyone else have any questions for me about that first page before we plough on with the next one? Anyone surprised at how far we've been able to pull down that paper just in the first page? I mean, we've pulled it down by a good 100 or so words. What you can see is that short sentences, one thought, one meaning per sentence. Is anyone surprised, though, that even though I'm a lawyer, I'm not opting for the big words. I'm not trying to put my vocabulary on display. See, one of the things that you'll learn is that writing like a lawyer is not what you expect. Writing like a lawyer is about being simple and compelling. Okay, my job, if I'm in court, is not to impress everyone with how clever I am. My job is to win the best possible outcome for my client. And often your clients will not be professional people. Often your clients will be people who might have a poor level of schooling. They might have mental health issues. They might have substance abuse issues. They will almost certainly be in distress of some sort. And part of your job will be to explain the law to them in a way that they can comprehend. Okay, and so being able to express legal concepts simply is an excellent skill. I personally find that everything I write is more compelling when it's simple. Okay, and when someone starts to try and blast big words at me, I tend to think they're not as sure of their argument as they might be. Now, sometimes you don't have a choice. Okay, so when you do contract law, when you do contracts B, you're going to come across a concept called estoppel, right? Which is obviously a technical word. If you're talking about estoppel, you don't have any choice but to use the word. You use the simplest language that's going to do the trick, I guess is my description. Annie, when you say, you've written a question in the text box there, when we do assessment, can we do some searches? Do you mean general internet searches or database searches? Look, we're going to come to this. I've already seen that we're going to come to this on the second page of the text, but yes, you can. Strongly encouraged. You really don't want to be making propositions of law without supporting them with some level of evidence. Once you have finished module 3, then you'll have a lot more options open to you in terms of where you might go looking for things. But essentially from now until you finish and retire in your career as a lawyer, nobody's interested in your personal opinion. Okay, nobody's interested in my personal opinion. Nobody's interested in anyone. It's a matter of what you can research and what you can support with your research. So that's the game. Now I'm going to share the screen again and get back to this horrible, horrible essay. So we're now down to the family court. We can get rid of that full stop. The family court is a court of circumscribed jurisdiction because it can only hear matters concerned with family law. Awesome. Get rid of a bunch of words. The family court only hears matters concerned with family law. So we've cut that sentence in half and we haven't lost any meaning at all. Now she says, since the Commonwealth has legislative power over marriages, the family court has jurisdiction over marital disputes. Now, a lot of this information is actually quite important, so I want to keep most of it, but really what we're talking about here, this is really just explaining what we mean by family law, isn't it? I'm going to say marital causes rather than disputes, because marital disputes sounds like the court's going to get involved in whether or not a married couple should be watching The Bachelor or the football on a Friday night, that's a marital dispute, but not really family law. Marital causes, annulments, divorces, and parenting issues. Okay, so we've cut a bunch of words out there, simplified it, made it read better. The family court only hears matters concerned with family law, which is marital causes, annulments, divorces, and parenting issues. the Constitution gives the Commonwealth legislative power in this area. Okay. The Federal Magistrates Court deals with most family law cases. Full stop. Only, we can get rid of only the, we can just say more complex. Interminable is just showing off. And they're obviously not interminable because they do end up terminating because they get resolved. So now we've turned that sentence into the family court only hears matters concerned with family law, which is marital causes, annulments, divorces, and parenting issues. The Constitution gives the Commonwealth legislative power in this area. So I want to put in a reference to Constitution, section 51. I don't know why it's in that weird font there. So we'll turn that into RL9. Same as everything else. So the family court only hears matters concerned with family law, which is marital causes, annulments, divorces, and parenting issues. The Constitution gives the Commonwealth legislative power in this area. The Federal Magistrates Court deals with most family law cases. More complex matters are referred to the family court. So we've got exactly the same material. And look, we're down to 766 words. So we're killing it here in terms of reducing the length. Get rid of the unnecessary punctuation there. The Federal Magistrates Court was created in 1999 to ease the caseload of the federal court, the family court, and the state courts hearing of federal matters. Now, I'm just noticing that we've got chat stuff going on here. Okay, so Damien's asked about annulments. And just in very brief, Damien, an annulment is very similar to a divorce, except with a divorce, you've got a marriage, which was a valid marriage, and it's coming to an end. An annulment happens when there was not a valid marriage in the first place. So a good example is if two people married and subsequently it was discovered that one of those people was already married, then obviously the second marriage would be bigamous and it would be annulled because it had never been a marriage in the first place. So annulment and divorce are basically the same thing, but with an annulment, there's never been a valid marriage in the first place. All right. So let's come back to this here. We can get rid of a bunch of words here. The Federal Magistrates Court was created in 1999 to ease the caseload of the higher courts. All right. Much of the Federal Magistrates Court's workload is concerned with... Now, this is heavily overwritten, so we can just go... The Federal Magistrates Court's workload is concerned... Actually, we can just get rid of... We know which court we're talking about. The court's workload is concerned with bankruptcy and administrative law. Now, there is some serious noise going on outside. I'm going to go and try and stop it for a moment. So just excuse me for a second. All right, we're back on station now. So, where were we? The court's workload is concerned with bankruptcy, administrative law, copyright disputes, and family laws. Family law. That's enough for one sentence. It also hears a prodigious number. There we are. Someone's trying to show off with their language again. It also hears many migration cases. Now, I could probably get rid of the stuff about what those migration cases are, but it's kind of interesting stuff, so let's leave it in there, such as appeals against visa and residency refusals. That'll do for that sentence. And then we've got the wrong there. I will tell you all now up front, that's one that gets my goat, the wrong there. There's there, and there, and it's important to get those right. There are more than 60 federal magistrates currently in service. I'm going to turn that into the word 60 because I think that looks better. Okay, so now we're down to 741 words. We've got a footnote in there that I haven't looked at, and that comes to lawteacher.net. Now, we can go way better than that because we can go and find a better source about why the Federal Magistrates Court was developed. But here's a problem. Now, I'm going to stop share for a moment and go back to the group. What's happened here with the student citing lawteacher.net. Now, if anybody's watching from lawteacher.net, please don't sue me because while I am going to bag you, you're no worse than a whole bunch of other websites. Has anybody encountered lawteacher.net yet? Don't. Lawteacher.net is a site that helps students cheat. Okay, it's a site where you can pay people to write essays. They also provide a bunch of resources which they say are just resources for students. They are almost universally rubbish in terms of their quality. And most of the essays that we see written by ghostwriting services, and we do pick them up, are rubbish as well. And that's part of the reason that we can see that they're ghostwritten essays. The example here is a great example because the Federal Magistrates Court hasn't been the Federal Magistrates Court since about 2011 when it became the Federal Circuit Court of Australia. Okay, so this student's gone along onto one of these free law student blog type of things where you can buy essays, and has obviously got their hands on an essay that has been written years ago and it's now well and truly out of date. Okay, there are some great sites out there for students. Survive Law, for instance, is a great site, but it helps you to be a good student. It's not promising to write your essays for you or give you sample essays that will save you from the job of writing your own. The stakes are so much higher for a law student than for any other student in the university when it comes to getting caught cheating. Here's why. At the end of your degree, once you've finished your degree and done your practical legal training, you have to make an application to the Supreme Court for admission as a legal practitioner. If you have an academic misconduct strike against your name, it is almost certain that the Supreme Court will say no for at least 10 years and your degree is worthless. Okay, you will have a degree that will not let you practice as a legal practitioner. Okay, so for most students at the university, the stakes are much lower, but for law students, the stakes are very high indeed. And you can understand why. The court doesn't want lawyers appearing before the court who can't be trusted. Okay, and so I can't emphasize enough. If a site even smells the tiniest bit dodgy, then either leave it alone or get on the email or the Facebook or whatever to the lecturer and say, hey, I'm having a look at this site, not really sure whether it's legit or not. What do you think? And we'll be more than happy to push you in the right direction. Any questions for me about that? Because it's really, really crucial, because half the time, like, people don't want to cheat. And I will say that I have seen in the intro papers a couple of people who did in fact cite lawteacher.net. I have no doubt at all that those students were genuinely trying to do research and they found what they thought was a great source of information. So, there's no problem with academic misconduct in this case. Don't go fretting or freaking out. It's all good. But these are sites to stay away from in future. Anyone have any questions for me about that? Because I really want to make sure you understand it. No? All right, back to the main game then. All right, so we're now, so what I'll do, I'm going to highlight this so that if it really was my paper, well, actually, we can just fix it. We can just go Federal Circuit Court of Australia. And that's cost us a couple of words, but hey, we've made up plenty in other places. All right, so now we're getting to the state court hierarchy, and we've got the same problem that we had previously with headings. So let's go through and sort them out for starters. I'm feeling really self-conscious typing because everyone can see what a Gumby I am when it comes to typing. All right, so that's so we've changed all of those now. So the High Court is a state court. Under the Constitution is just padding. We've already said earlier in the paper that the High Court gets its powers from the Constitution. The High Court can hear appeals from state and territory Supreme Court. This is the joining word that we can get rid of. It also, reduce the crime against apostrophes. It also hears cases against the constitutionality of any state or territorial legislation. And then I'll say, therefore it is the superior court in both federal and state jurisdictions. And we're going to find a better source than Wikipedia. Court of Appeal. So we're down to 743 words now. The Supreme Court in each state has an appeals division. Get rid of variously, it's doing nothing. Why don't I just say each state's Supreme Court has an appeals division called the Court of Appeal, the Full Court, or the Court of Criminal Appeal. Virtually never should you start a word with a conjunction like and. Sorry, start a sentence with a conjunction like and. We can get rid of that. These courts only have appellate jurisdiction. They hear appeals from the Supreme, county or district courts. Now you can see that in this sentence, the student has made one humongous monster sentence by just joining everything together with ands. We'll just get rid of them. In most cases, the Court of Appeal consists of 3 judges of appeal. Now, the big problem with this paragraph at this point is that there are no references. So I would want to be going through and finding some sources for that. But we haven't really, I think we've only gained about 2 words in that. But you can see that that paragraph now reads a whole lot better. Each state's Supreme Court has an appeals division called the Court of Appeal, the Full Court, or the Court of Criminal Appeal. These courts only have appellate jurisdiction. They hear appeals from the Supreme, County, or District Courts. In most cases, the Court of Appeal consists of 3 judges of appeal. Beautiful. Okay, Supreme Court, another crime against apostrophes. And I think we can get rid of that word anyway. These are the highest courts in each state and territory. There's a joining word that we can get rid of. They hear the most serious criminal offences, including murder and manslaughter. I'm going to get rid of treason. You wouldn't know this yet, but treason is a Commonwealth crime, not a state crime. So that's just plain wrong. Other charges that involve multiple offences that are greatly convoluted may also be referred to the Supreme Courts. They may also hear matters involving multiple offences. Now I'm starting to see the word they repeated too much. So for this 3rd time, I'm going to cost myself a word, but improve the readability. Supreme Courts also hear civil disputes involving great complexity and humongous amounts of money. Hear complex civil disputes and those involving substantial amounts of money. Now we've got the county court or the district court. Now you can see here, what she's done is correct. Victoria has the county court. New South Wales, South Australia, Queensland and Western Australia have the district court. What we can say... Oh, no, I was going to say we can just say all other states, but we can't because Tasmania doesn't have a district court and neither does the ACT. So we'll leave that where it is. An intermediate court hearing criminal trials for serious indictable offences, it has jurisdiction to hear. Okay, so these are intermediate courts hearing criminal trials for serious indictable offences. I can just say hearing criminal trials for all but the most serious indictable offences. Now, if I say such as manslaughter or murder there, it's going to look like I'm saying they can hear criminal. These are criminal. They'll hear criminal trials for manslaughter or murder. So I might say so. Not charges such as manslaughter or murder. These are intermediate courts hearing criminal trials. I don't like that. So just for style, I'm going to say county and district courts are intermediate courts hearing criminal trials for all but the most serious, indictable offences, so not charges such as manslaughter and murder. I think I can still improve it. County and district courts are intermediate courts hearing all but the most serious indictable charges, so not charges such as manslaughter or murder. That's even better. So now we're back to 716. Magistrates Court. Oh, hang on. We've got up here in Supreme Courts, we've got footnote number 8, which is Mel making the same point that I made to you a moment ago. I don't even know if there is a boyessaysonline.org. I certainly hope there isn't, but we're going to put a note to ourselves to find a decent source. Okay. Next thing you'll notice is that here we've suddenly gone from double line spacing to single line spacing. In terms of content, that doesn't matter, but in terms of telling me whether or not this is a student who's put a lot of effort into their paper, makes a huge difference. So we're going to get rid of that change in spacing. You've put a lot of effort into your work. You may as well present it in a way that makes it clear that you have put a lot of effort into your work. So Tyler has asked, would we remove the full stop for the title? Yes, we should. Thank you. Well done. You get a gold star, Tyler. Magistrates Court. The lowest court or the inferior court is the Magistrates Court, which deals with minor criminal offences, most of which can be tried without the need for a jury. Okay. It's actually not too bad of a sentence. The lowest or inferior court is the Magistrates Court. Now, I could probably change this sentence and use the present continuous form of the verb here by saying the lowest or inferior court is the Magistrates Court, comma, dealing with minor criminal offences. But I still think that that would be a bit clumsy. So it deals with minor criminal offences. Generally without a jury. Magistrates courts also hear civil disputes up to the value of $100,000. And we've got a reasonable source, okay? Prefer the Magistrates Courts Act. But at least that's better than buyessaysonline.net. Magistrates courts also hear civil disputes up to the value of $100,000. We'll get rid of the joining word. Now this is interesting. We've got dealing with minor criminal offences generally without a jury. Then we cut to civil matters. Then we cut back to criminal matters. So what I'm going to do is put all the criminal stuff together. So I'll stick these words up here and then play with them. It deals with minor criminal matters generally without a jury. And conducts committal hearings. These hearings determine if there is sufficient, sounds to me like the person doesn't actually understand what commensurable means. These hearings determine if there is sufficient evidence for serious criminal charges to be heard in the Supreme Court. All right, we're going to bust under 700 words any moment. Magistrates courts also hear civil disputes up to the value of $100,000. In New South Wales, this level of court is called the local court, and on Norfolk Island, a self-governing territory, it is called the Court of Petty Sessions. 700 words exactly, and we're only 2 paragraphs from the end. Tasmania, comma, the ACT and the NT all have 2 court hierarchies. Now, of course, there's a difference. If I don't have the hyphen there, it says that they've got 2 court hierarchies. So they've got 2 separate hierarchies. With the hyphen there, it's saying there's 1 hierarchy, but it involves 2 courts. Tasmania, the ACT, and the Northern Territory all have 2 court hierarchies. They lack an intermediate court. And we can get rid of the rest of those words. Because already earlier in the paper, we've talked about what an intermediate court is. Western Australia has all 3 court levels plus a state-based family court. And I think it is important to say that it is the only state that has a state-based family court. So we can say, unlike the other states, it also has a state-based family court. Down to 690. Benefits of court hierarchy. I'm going to turn that into a bit more of a readable thing. Benefits of a court hierarchy. Without these hierarchies, courts would find it exceedingly difficult to operate as quickly, effectively, efficiently as they do. Hence, the court hierarchy provides some clarity and verisimilitude to the administration of justice. Now, I will tell you that I did challenge Mel to see if she could work the word verisimilitude into the sentence somewhere, and she has managed it most aptly, so I'm impressed, but it's not going to stay there. I think that this sentence is the wrong way around. So we're going to start with the court hierarchy provides structure and clarity. Actually, structure, clarity, and efficiency to the administration of justice. Without these hierarchies, courts could not operate as quickly, effectively, and efficiently as they currently do. Now, it says here particular levels of courts deal with particular levels of disputes or criminal offences. I think that really goes at the end of the first sentence, doesn't it? I think we can just say as particular levels of court deal with particular matters. Without these hierarchies, courts could not operate as quickly, as effectively and efficiently as they currently do. Court hierarchies also allow for the effective functioning of the doctrine of precedent, localities, specializations, and expertise. Now, that's not really clearly explained. Court hierarchies also allow for the effective functioning of the doctrine of precedent, they allow the court to function in various locations and they support the court's development of specialisation and expertise. So we're still under, even though we've added those words at the end, we're still under 700 words, and we are going to find a better source. So you can see from 970 or 980 words at the start, we've pulled this down to just under 700 words and made it a whole lot more readable. Now, what I'm going to do after the tute is I'm going to put on each of the learning firms and also on the Moodle site. Actually, I'll just put it on the Moodle site. I'm going to put the pre and post versions of the essay. Okay, so you'll be able to get the version of the essay as it looked when it came to me, as it looked at the start of the tute, and you'll be able to compare it to the way that it looks now. So what you can see is that there are a few principles that we apply. The first one is short sentences do the trick. Okay, short sentences are far more effective for this sort of writing than long boilerplate sentences, which is probably not what you were expecting of legal writing, but it's the truth. Second thing is that if there is a simple or a complicated way to explain something, go for the simple way. But the most important one, and it will take you a long time to really grapple with this, every single word must fight for its place on the page. Okay, and you'll hear me say this over and over and over if you do advanced statutory interpretation with me, which you can do as early as next term if you like. Every single word must be there for a purpose. It must be accomplishing something that wouldn't happen if that word wasn't there. If you would like to see how this is done excellently, then my suggestion to you is that you use the next break between T1 and T2 to go and read some Siegfried Sassoon or some E.E. Cummings or any of the other great poets. Okay, if you read great poetry, you will see that what the poets do is they make every single word fight for its place on the page. The highest form of the art, as far as I'm concerned, is haiku. Okay, where you've only got so many syllables to get your message across, and they do it excellently. Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. We need to be able to convey complex terms in a compelling way without necessarily using complex language. And what you can see there is that we've cut this thing down by a fifth. We've cut it down, in fact, almost by a third. And does anybody feel that we lost content? I mean, we really didn't, did we? It's all, it says the same stuff. It just says it in a far more efficient and effective way. Final thing I guess I'll say before I open up for questions. I mean, we're past 8 o'clock, but I don't think anyone really cares because this is a bonus tute anyway. The final thing that I'll say is that that process that you've seen me go through there, that's actually what I do. Okay, that's what I've done through every undergraduate paper that I did. It's what I did with my master's thesis. It's what I did with my PhD thesis. And now my master's thesis had to be under 50,000 words. Okay, that was the absolute cutoff, cannot be more than 50,000 words. My first draft was 57,000 words, and without losing any context, we got it down to 50,000 words. Okay, using these techniques is really, really powerful. And you can see that it's a matter of interrogating your own stuff. Now, I keep saying final thing, but then I have further little brain flashes. Did it sound weird to anyone that I kept kind of orally reading the paragraphs back? You kind of have to do that. You kind of have to see how they sound. And the reason for that, anyone like Impressionism? Anyone got a bit of an eye for art? Anyone like the Impressionists? You go and have a look at the paintings of someone like Claude Monet. Now, he didn't really paint precisely. He painted little dabs and dashes all over the place. And your brain kind of fills in the blanks. So you can look at it and you can see exactly what he's painting because your brain takes the cues from the shapes and the colours and it fills in the gaps. Unfortunately, your brain does the same thing when you read because we all know what sentence structure is supposed to look like. And so it's almost like your brain assumes that words are going to be there if those are the words that should be there to complete the sentence. It can be very difficult to proofread your own work as a result. I find that reading things out orally tells me if they make sense, and it also forces me to read them properly. Probably makes me look a bit silly sometimes if anyone was to walk in and be watching. And I have to say there was a few moments there when I felt a bit self-conscious doing it in front of all of you, but it really does help. Okay, so I'm starting to get questions in the chat box, which is great. Chloe says, would I penalise a student for being well under the word count? Look, I wouldn't penalise a student specifically for being under the word count. Generally, however, most of us, when we're setting papers, we generally write an answer ourselves, and we generally have a pretty good idea of about how long it's meant to be. If you've got 2,000 words to play with and you're writing 1,700 words, no problem. Okay, that's fine. If you've got 2,000 words to play with and you're writing 1,100 words, that probably means you're missing something. And so if you're too far under the word limit, I would be going back and saying, what am I missing? Now, if you're a few hundred words under the word limit and you're still thoroughly convinced that you've spotted all of the issues, then there's no problem. It's certainly a lesser offence to go under the word count than it is to go over the word count. When you go over the word count, I've always felt like it was kind of a bit selfish, because when you go over the word count, you're doing two things. First, you're saying, I want the marker to spend more time marking my paper than they do everyone else's, which means everyone else mightn't get their papers for a day or two later because there's 30 of us who've gone over our word limits. But the second thing is, imagine that you've really done what I've just shown you there. You've really worked hard and you've thought, geez, if I had another 150 words, there's another point that I'd put in here, but I'm going to let that point go because I'm trying to stay under the word limit. And then someone else says, no, bugger it, I'm going to do the extra 150 words. Well, does anyone else see that that's a bit unfair? It's a bit unfair on the student who's really making the effort to get under the word limit, because they end up using or giving less of an answer than the person who goes over. So I kind of, and I always find that when people go over, I look at their paper and I say, well, I could tighten that up. I could bring that up and bring it under the limit. So if you're going to go over when you're handing stuff into me, you want to be pretty sure that it's written really tight. I'll just leap forward to Diane. She's saying, would you use 10% either side of the word count as a reasonable number? I'm going to give you a lawyer's answer to that because it really does depend on what the instructions are. So quite often I'm quite clear when I'll say the word limit is 2,000 words, do not go over 2,000 words. If I've given an instruction that clear, then I would feel perfectly entitled to penalise people for going to 2001. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't, but obviously there's no 10% barrier in that case. Generally speaking, I think that students who assume a 10% barrier end up writing fat rather than writing tight. So I would always be aiming to hit within a few dozen if I'm going to go over. The subject is called Advanced Statutory Interpretation and Legal Drafting. Now, although I said you can do it as early as next term, I would probably suggest that you do it, do it as early as you can, but pay careful attention to the prerequisites and co-requisites that you need to be building up early in your degree. It's no good doing advanced stat early and then finding out that you've missed doing a first year subject that you needed as a prerequisite to do other subjects that you wanted to do down the track. So if you're going to add in a subject like that, make sure you really look at what the implications will be if you're pulling another subject out. Nigel's asked, what's the word limit for assignment 2 for intro to law? There really isn't one because it's a toolkit rather than an essay. Having said that, though, I really don't want people giving me 10,000 words either. So what I might do is give some attention to that and perhaps as we get closer to that, give you some more guidance on what that product should look like. So that you're not kind of flying blind there. With that, is that good enough, Nigel? Is that enough to help you along?
Yes, that's fair. Thanks.
Excellent. Megan says the essay had no conclusion. That's absolutely true. But if I was going to be bothered doing primary writing, doing first up writing on this, I probably would give it one. And now I've got a few hundred words that I can use for it if necessary. But yeah, I agree with you. It was not. It wasn't a great essay anyway, but it's a hell of a lot better than it was at the start. Annie's asking about round brackets and square brackets. Now, I'll talk about this in Module 3 when I talk about citation. Essentially, though, it's kind of a hangover from hard copy law reports. Some law reports, the volumes are just numbered. So the Commonwealth law reports, for instance, I think they're up to about volume 200 or something now. And volume 1 started in 1903. In that case, when they give you the date, they're really just giving you the date as a courtesy to tell you whenabouts this was. And so that goes in round brackets. But some law reports actually have a volume each year. So if you're looking for, you can't go looking for volume 135 because there's no volume 135. You're looking for the 1973 volume. Okay, and so the way they indicate that in a citation is that they put it in square brackets. The custom has become that when you're doing an online citation, so for something like OSLI, you also use square brackets because typically when you're going into OSLI to look for a case, you identify the court and then you select the year and then you go hunting within that year for the case. And so the square brackets are there because the year is important to the search process. It's not just a courtesy. But have a look at the videos from Module 3, and this will all become super clear, hopefully. Leonie, you have a question.
Yeah, I've got a question about citations in case it's excerpts in textbooks.
Yep.
So the situation in the property law text is that they've started citing long established principles from like 1896 and things like that in modern cases, but then that's put in a case excerpt. So is it better to cite the modern case, or is it better to cite the actual case excerpt in the textbook?
I'm going to assume that you're not just citing out of the textbook and that you're going to the database and actually finding and pulling out the original cases and then using the textbook to take you to those pinpoints. But on that assumption, it kind of depends. If you've got a classic case and the current court is referring to that classic case, generally speaking, you're not going to worry about the current court. You're only going to cite the classic case. Okay. However, there are some exceptions. Now, for those of you who are in intro, if the next minute or so doesn't make any sense, please don't worry or struggle to understand it, because Leonie's just about graduating, so I'm jumping ahead to answer her question. But so if it's confusing, that's cool. It probably should be confusing at this point. Leonie, the two situations that jump out at me where you'd want to be citing the later case. First is if you've got an authority that is from another jurisdiction, and so the subsequent case is affirming that authority for our jurisdiction. So if you've got let's say you've got a Queensland Supreme Court case, and they're saying, well, the principles for this were established by the New South Wales Supreme Court in blah case, and we consider that those principles apply in Queensland, well, then you'd really need to cite both. You'd need to cite the New South Wales case to show the principles, and then your citation would be, comma, affirmed in, and then the Queensland case, because that really shows why it's the authority that you can rely on in Queensland. It's the authority you can rely on in Queensland because the Queensland Supreme Court says the New South Wales Supreme Court got it right. Yeah. The second is if there has been conflicting authorities. Okay, so you know how sometimes there's an issue where they kind of bounce around a bit, the courts bounce around a bit, and then particularly in the High Court, you'll get the judges say, well, these are the authorities, this is where the authorities clash, and we say that this is the position in Australia now. And so what you would really be citing then is you're probably going to be citing the original case as being the foundation of the principle, and then the High Court's affirmation of that case as being the decision that gives it its contemporary relevance. The other one that would be is if you got, let's say you have an old common law principle of evidence, right? And then it was, there's a statutory provision, and there's a question about the extent to which the statutory provision has done away with the old common law. And the court comes and says, well, as far as we're concerned, these aspects of that old principle have survived the statutory, the statutory changes. So you're using the old case to show where the principles arose, and you're using the new case to show that those principles are still relevant, even though there's been statute in the area. You see where I'm coming from? So you're looking for those sort of situations. If it's just a 2017 case that says, well, we're applying this case from 1964, don't worry about the 2017 case. It's not an authority for anything. It's just applying the authority. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's probably brought in context too to those cases, such as something like cows, where they've actually scanned the page.
Right.
And no pinpoint paragraphs. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, yeah. No, it's fixed it for me. Thank you.
Excellent. No worries. Anybody else got any questions? that you want to fire at me? No, everybody's saying it's 8:30. Anthony and the Commonwealth Games is on. Time to call it quits. All right. Well, look, thank you all for giving up some of your non-teaching week time. I do hope it's been useful to you. For those of you who are looking at this on YouTube, I'm going to hope that most of you are CQ Uni students doing Intro to Law, in which case you'll be able to find the essays on the Moodle site. I'm not sure whether I can upload files to the YouTube thingy. If I can, I will. But if you're some random stranger who happens to be watching this tute and thinks, geez, that was all right, then give me a shout, anthony.marinac@gmail.com. And if you ask me really nicely, I'll send you the files. All right, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording now.